This is Gemara Bava Metziah, Daf Samoch Dalid, and we pick it up at the bottom of Samoch Gimel Amid Beis, and Rav Nachman continues with a third din, 5 lines from the bottom. V'amar Rav Nachman. We recently learned the famous din of Rav Nachman, the Klala de Rebisa, that Kol Agar Noterle is Aser. Then Rav Nachman continued with a second din at the end of the previous year. And today Rav Nachman continues with a third. Says Rav Nachman, Hi man, if someone borrowed small monies, pshiti, coins, from his friend, and he realizes, the borrower realizes, when he looks down, that he doesn't have the small change that he thought he borrowed, but rather tufaina. There's a little bit more than he anticipated. Says the Gemara from the din of Rav Nachman, if it's the normal amount of time that one can make a mistake, which the Gemara is going to explain what that means in a moment, then of course, and if it's not the normal amount of monies that one would generally make a mistake, we assume that the lender decided the guy was borrowing 75 cents, and the lender gave him 85 cents, and we'll see more particularly what this means in a few moments. Then the halacha is, we assume it is a matana. Says the Gemara, Hechi dami bechdei shadas night. What does it mean? That's the amount that one can make a mistake. Amar Rav Acha, Bereid Rav Yosef. Says Rav Acha in the name of Rav Yosef, as we turn over to Samach Dalid Amid Beis. Rav Nachman responds that what does it mean? Bechdei shadas noite bi'isu raisa. It means an error of a tenth, v'chum shaisa, or a fifth. If there are 10 extra coins extra, or if there are 5 extra coins extra, and this is because this was the way that monies were counted in the times of the Gemara, then we could assume that it was a mistake. He added an extra 10, an extra 5, and then you have to return it. Amar lei Ravacha Breder Rav Ravashi. Ask Ravacha Breder Rav Ravashi. V'inish tekivo. And if the lender is a takif, he's hard, he's not such a generous person, who deloya in matana, who generally doesn't give gifts. What's the halacha in such a scenario? Amr lei Dilma Migzal Gazle. Says Rav Ashi, no, maybe the lender one time stole something. So now to pay him back, he's adding it, he's being muvla. He's swallowing it up in the cheshbon so that he's purposely giving him a little more back. So Rav Ashi explaining that even if this guy is generally not the type that's going to give a gift, we still can assume it is a gift. Tanya, 4 lines down, Samach Daled Amud Aleph proves the Gemara. Someone steals from his friend, but he's mavliya. He includes it into the cheshbon, yatsa. The halacha is he has fulfilled his obligation. Ve'ishav is exila asher gazal. L'maisa, he returned that which he stole. Asks the Gemara, v'yinish alma. And if the lender is someone that just came to town, and therefore there was never any dealings, we're saying that maybe he stole from the borrower, but he has no shaykhs to the borrower. Says the Gemara, then what's the din? Amrle responds, Rav Ashi, maybe a different person stole something from the borrower, and went to the lender and said to him, listen, I have to pay this guy back. So therefore, when this guy borrows a few dollars, the 75 cents, let me just throw that extra quarter in so that I can pay back that which I stole. So 2 ways of the Gemara saying in which one could potentially be mavliya, swallow up the money, and therefore, even if it's an inish takifa, even if it is a strong person, we still assume that it was purposeful, that he wanted to add an extra money. Omar Rav Kahana. Says the Gemara, 10 lines down, the first words on the line of Omar Rav Kahana. Haviyasivna v'sholi bilkir derav. I was sitting at the end of a shir of Rav Shamis, Amar Kari Gari, and I heard him saying, Rav in the shir, Kari, gourd. V'layadanon, in the Cham, I Kamar, what was Rav saying? Basar to come Rav, Amrule, when Rav got up, I said to the other Talmidim, Rav Kana is talking, my Kari to come Rav. What did the Rebbe mean in shir? What was he repeating? Gourd. Amruli, so the Talmidim said, Ochi Kama Rav, this is what Rav was saying. Hi man, the Zuzi Liginoi. If someone gives money to a gardener, Akari, he gives it to the gardener for gourds, Vikazli Asara Kari B'nei Zarta, in a situation in which Asari Kari, 10 gourds, B'nei Zarta, at the length of a certain area, are sold for a zuz. Va'amar le, and the gardener says, Yehivna lecha b'nei garmida. And the gardener says to the buyer, pay me, and I'll give you at a later date, b'nei garmida, larger gourds that are longer than amma. Shari, that is mutter. Lisnayu, shari. But lesnayu, if he doesn't actually have that item, they're still small, aser. So says Rav Kahana that in such a scenario will have a difference into whether the lender has the item to himself or not. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Pshita. Of course, if he doesn't have the item, this is a classical case of Riddish. Explains the Gemara, smack in the middle of the Amid, the first word line is Ma'u de Tema. Ma'u de Tema, kivim de memela karabu. I would have thought that since a small gourd eventually morphs into a larger one, Shavar Dami, maybe there's no problem, you're allowed to pay such back. Kamash Malon, the Chiddush was that Lemaisa, it's not considered having the large ones, therefore to pay back the large ones would be forbidden. Says the Gemara Kiman. Now, whose opinion is this brisa going like? Ki Tanya, like the following Tanya, the Tanya we learned in a brisa. If someone is going to milk his izim, his goats, or to share the sheep, to move the honey from the beehive. So on the way, you find your friend and you say to him, listen, whatever milk the goats produce, they should be sold to you. Three scenarios, the one is willing to part with his own items, mutter. Aval, however, mamrlo masha easy chaleves. Kach v'kach machlcha. Masha recheli golez. It's kavach machlcha. Masha kavarasi. Roida kach v'kach achzmerlach. And of all stories, he said kach v'kach, a certain amount is sold to you, and then pays for it before the item is produced. Then it is aser. So good. If you're not giving a certain amount, if you're just saying that which the sheep shears, that which the goat produces, that's mutter. If you put a precise number on it, that's aser. Va'aval gav, and says the Gemara, Timimila karabu, the milk will go eventually, and the bees will eventually produce, but still, kivin nayu bahi shaita, since at this moment you don't have it, therefore, says the Gemara, that's going to be aser, classical exception to the regular rules of bisa, the forbiddance of lending one item to the next. Igadi Amri Amar Rava, another Lashon, 10 lines to the bottom, says Rava, Kivan de Mimela Karabu Shabertami. Says Rava, since the fruits, these gourds, these vegetables grow on their own, therefore, even if he only has small ones, he's still able to sell them in advance. Ask the Gemara, we said if it's for a specific amount, it's aser. Answers the Gemara, Hasam lamine karabu de. Answers the Gemara, in that scenario, they don't grow from the item itself. To shaklu leila hai, that you're taking this item, vasa achrina beduchte. Acha mina karabu de shaklu leila hai, lasi achrina beduchte. So says the Gemara, a fundamental difference whether the item itself is growing or whether it's just going to be going up in value. We continue 4 lines from the bottom with the statement of Abaye. Says Abaye, continuing the theme of times in which one could advance payment for whatever item it is. Says Abaye, Sharu leila inish lameimer leila chavre. One is able to tell his friends, Heilach arba zuzi achavita de chamra. One is allowed to say, here's 4 zuz for a barrel of wine, and I'll get the wine at a later date. Itakfa birshuseich. If it turns sour, then I'm not buying the item anymore and it still belongs to you. Iyakra, izila bershusi. If it goes up or down, then I'm asking, I'm buying it now, I'm paying you now. Only if it turns that it's null, it's nothing, it's sour, then I'm saying, then I'm not buying it. So I'm really Rav Shravya Abaye, says Rav Shravya to Abaye as we turn over to Samach Daled on the base. Hi, Karoiv Lischar V'Rochaik Lahefsidu. This case is smelling not so good. It's Karoiv Lischar and it's very Rochaik Lahefsid. The odds are stacked against the person, and therefore Amar Le answers Vaykim the Kavle Zuda Karoiv Lazehu. Lamaisa, what do you mean? The guy takes $1 and he's happy. So since he's Mikabel Azuz, says Abai, an important aside, it's only going to be enough in such scenarios. But if the person accepts the payment for a certain service, then we say that it's fine, as that is what is included. We continue with the Mishnah, 3 lines down, Samach Dalid Amud Aleph. If you lend someone money, you can't live in his court for free. Nor are you allowed to borrow from him, rent from him for cheap, because meaning I lend you $1,000. Now, Lamaisa, the next day I need a car, and you rent cars. So you tell me, listen, this car is usually $200. I give it to you for $190. A car is a toy for you did for me. That's called ribis. That's called, in all intents and purposes, you give me the extra money of the car, plus paying back my loan. A classical story of ribis. Amar Rav Yosef Arminumi, 6 lines down, Samach Daled Amud Beis. Amar Rav Nachman Afal Bisha Amru. Even though they said Adar b'chaz chaver shlomidas ein zor lalos l'schar, so how does that fit in our case? You're allowed to go live in someone else's house without permission. Helveu v'dar b'chazer sarch lalos l'schar. But if you lend the guy money and then the guy wants to be in your chatzar, then you do have to pay him due to the stigma potentially of ribis. My Kamashlan says more. What's the chiddush? Tanina hamavas chaveroi. You're not allowed to live in his court for free. And they issue ribis, nor you're allowed to rent him for cheaper because it's ribis. So you already knew in the Mishnah that in lieu of a halva, of a loan that someone is receiving, he's not allowed to extend to the malveh preferential treatment. Says the Gemara, if you only have the Mishnah, the agra. A chassid that's going to be rented, v'gaver davel and megar, and people will get rented out. Aval chassid lo kaimel agra, your backyard. V'gaver davel and megar, you're not necessarily planning on paying him. Aim Allah, you think it doesn't apply in that case? Says the Gemara, indeed. Kamash malah, and of course, it applies everywhere. And we conclude, says the Gemara, ikam. Ta'amri, those that learn, Amar Rav Yisrael Menumi, Amar Rav Nachman Avish, Amar Rav Chatz Chavero, Shlem Yidaita, Yeino Yitzarech Lalos L'Schar, but Halveini V'dar B'Chaser Yitzarech Lalos L'Schar, but if first money was exchanged, then you would have to pay for it. So man damar halveu kol shekain halveini. Man damar halveini aval halveu loy. My time give the car lavadated achios vis. Less lamba, they say, I never had such an intent. Therefore, I don't have anything to do with it. Therefore, you want to put it up, you have to pay for it. But it's nothing to do with the neighbors. Stop over here. I'll pick it up for Rabbi and Rav Yosef. Siyata Tishmai.